Today's episode is brought to you by Media for All, which was set up to help encourage more Black, Asian, and other ethnic talent into media, and to provide a support and mentoring network to ensure talent flourishes in the media industry that we all love. If you're looking for a mentor or would like to mentor young ethnic talent, check them out at mediaforall.org.uk, and it is all 100% free. Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing one of our industry's leaders, and this week is no different. I'm on a call with Ashish Porwal, who is Head of Insights and Analytics, South East Asia and Taiwan for GSK. Ashish, thank you so much for joining us today. Could you give the audience a bit of an overview of who you are and what you do?
Well, first of all, thank you, Tom, for having me on your podcast. As you've already introduced, I'm Ashish. I head consumer insights and business analytics for the Southeast Asia and Taiwan region at GSK Consumer Healthcare. In terms of the work scope, that means being responsible for finding actionable insights for more than 10 brands across 4 very different consumer categories and 11 very diverse markets. I quote and I brag these numbers often to assure you that there is never a dull day at GSK. These brands include Sensodyne, Panadol, Voltaren, Centrum. You must have heard or used some of these brands in your lifetime. In terms of my role at GSK, I'm sometimes the strategy guy trying to uncover risks and opportunities for our brands. At other times, I'm the brand doctor trying to understand what is limiting our growth. And on yet other instances, I'm the analyst supporting pricing decisions, market forecasts, and media optimization, etc. In terms of my background, I started from something very different, very far from the marketing world, right? I was doing intellectual property rights industry work, going through dozens of scientific literature every day. But I soon realized I cannot keep myself awake at that job. So from there on, I moved to valuation of intellectual property, or you may call it like pricing of intellectual property. I was taking one tiny step at a time to come towards where I'm today. From pricing of intellectual property, I moved to pricing of FMCG products. From there to assessing marketing effectiveness of FMCG products, and now here. Along the way, I also made a couple of attempts at running, that's something very shiny these days, right? Running your own e-commerce venture. So I did that a couple of times, wasn't very successful, but those were some incredibly adventurous stints full of on-ground learning, trade, negotiations, marketing, etc. Even technology. I did my websites on my own and all. So quite an interesting journey there. And that's about me.
Can you tell me what the e-com businesses were? What were you selling?
Interesting. So I was in the luxury home care businesses, home decor businesses, So I was actually doing end-to-end, like procuring things. This was a very bootstrapped one. This is my second one, which is where I spend most time on. I was procuring stuff, mostly imported stuff in India. And, imported at that particular time really had that connotation of being high quality, better looking, and all of those things. So I was playing on that particular idea, if I may say so, and trying to bring it online where I did not see anybody really specializing on that side. Yeah, so that's broadly an introduction to that venture.
So an interesting career from IP to e-com to analytics and insights. So what in the last few years in terms of beliefs and behaviors have really changed the way that you work?
Yeah, interesting. The last 5 years have been in this marketing domain. So I think this will also be a little bit relevant for your listeners as well, right? And actually, there are many. It's not just one idea. I keep reading about health, productivity, etc., and so many things have influenced me. But if I may talk about something more work related, this is something one of my previous bosses told me. He said, more often than not, people have the right intentions and want to do it right. So if somebody is a conflict with your ideas and you get a feeling they are being irrational and blocking your way, there is possibly a way out of that situation. To solve this, one should make a genuine effort to understand and appreciate their constraints and motivations. I mean, the other person's constraints and motivations. It often leads to a better collaboration and end result for both. You know, so if you don't mind, I have some examples to share. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Great. So this example is again from my last 5 years of marketing marketing and analytics time. Um, I would so I was like running marketing effectiveness studies for my marketing team, and I would go to them and I would say, "Hey, your investments are giving a low ROI and need to be cut down." And they would say, "Rubbish! Your data is wrong." I was like, "Wow!" In my mind, that data is right and the models are very accurate. So when somebody challenges the accuracy, it is a clear conflict. I was wondering, maybe they don't want to do the right thing at all. Maybe they're not just willing to accept that they could be wrong, right? With time, like 1 or 2 projects down the line, I realized that they're not against the idea of ROI. It is such a well-established idea. Yeah? I realized, why would they be against this idea? All they're trying to do is safeguard their marketing budgets. After all, we cannot take away the money and expect the brand to grow faster, right? To grow, one has to invest. So, with that idea in my mind now, I turned the conversations into a more constructive one. Instead of talking about cutting down investments, I would talk about redirecting them to other media types. Your TV is not working for you, but digital is doing great. Can you put some more money into digital? And in some cases, I would even ask them to put the same money into the other brands that they themselves cared about. So my focus moved from recommending budget cuts to understanding reasons for low ROIs and how do we correct them and how do we channel these savings, if at all, into some other things that people care. Suddenly everything changed. I was getting more collaboration. My meetings were less challenging. So this I kind of started liking this new way of working, and that has stayed with me even now. I always look at the perspective from the other person is coming, and to be kind of repeating myself, they more often than not, people have the right intentions and want to do it right. That's it.
So you're talking about a very empathy-based approach, but what is the process? How do you actually do that? I hear that you say that you see their perspective, but do you have a model that you use? Do you have a list of questions that you ask yourself, or do you just do it by feel?
I think the first step is to realize that something went wrong. So when you are in that meeting and you're feeling challenged, when you come out of that meeting and see that what you wanted to achieve has not worked out, you haven't achieved what you wanted to, probably the meeting was, to use the same word again, rubbished, right? Then something has to be done. And that's when you start to ask questions on exactly what could be going wrong. Sometimes you wouldn't really immediately get the answers, and that's where you would have to depend on people around you to help you with that, right? You can't achieve everything on your own. There are people, there are teams for a reason, and you need to discuss this out. If you don't find the flaw or the problem yourself, then discuss it out, I would say. And in more cases than not, because when you start thinking about this, you've already won half the battle, right? That you now know that there's something gone wrong and I would want to change that. I would say the rest half would happen automatically. You will find ways. These ways will not always be the same. I don't have a process as such. It's more than empathy, I would say. Sometimes we really have to understand not just the not just being nice. Empathy has this connotation of being nice, but it is more about the work objectives of that other person, the targets that the other person has to meet, and to think about why would they have said so. Does that kind of help answer, Tom?
Yeah, and what you're talking about is some very fine-tuned kind of senior tactics for getting on with people and getting the job done. But what advice would you give to a student who's new to the industry, who isn't having to solve these big problems yet, but just wants to get started?
I think there is no taking away the fact that experience will help, and if the student is new and is getting started, the best thing to do at that time would be to get a mentor, right? A mentor is probably there are different there are different ideas around mentors. Some people like one mentor. Some people say that I would want to have different mentors who excel at different things. So it's your choice ultimately, but having that mentor in the team and going talking to that person would really help. As I said, this thing also while it did occur to me later, but it was something that my previous boss told me, right? It's not that I did not know, but I never paid attention to this fact until he said that, and that it went home there.
So mentors, a great suggestion. How do you find a mentor? What is the right way for a grad who wants to get into the industry but needs a bit of guidance or guidance from a group of people? How do you suggest that they find one and approach them?
Getting a mentor beforehand is something I would say is a little bit challenging. Before you have entered, or you're looking to enter, it's a bit challenging. That's when you would have to depend on your friend circle, your family, your seniors from college who have been into the industry. But I would say once you enter, once you are in working with the company, spend the first 3-4 months, understanding what people are doing, who's good at what, and then choose your mentor. Not be in a hurry to really choose the senior most person as your mentor just because you will be shining. That's not the idea of mentorship there. You just wait for a while, try to assess who's good at what do you want to learn really, and that should help getting the right mentor. Until then, depend on your social circles, I would say.
So before we move on to your shiny new object, I want to ask if you have a top marketing tip, a silver bullet that you were told early on in your career that you often refer to or you share the most often.
Sorry, Tom, if you don't mind, I have another advice for the new joiners in the industry.
Of course. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I kind of feel very passionate about this, given that I've made some mistakes myself. So, um, you know, I'll take 2 minutes to kind of explain a little bit of a context around this. I feel that our industry really has a very simple and a very complex side to it. The simple side is where you want to do one specific task, like you're planning your TV GRPs, or you're shooting an ad, or you're kind of running a marketing effectiveness model. Don't get me wrong here. I don't mean to say that experience has no value, but once you do this task 2 or 3 times, you find the task itself is very simple, right? And what makes this industry complex is the variety of these tasks, right? Imagine the number of things that you could do to reach your audience, like from and with the digital proliferation, these have only exploded, like YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, WeChat, whatnot. And to top it all, the use of all of these differ by the category in which you work or the market in which you're working, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that in, because of these complexities, this newcomer that we're talking about should not really kind of stick to the same role, same task for a longer period of time, trying to sharpen that skill so much for, let's say, 5 years, and come out as an expert. That could be a path that that person could take, like for maybe 5 to 10 years down the line. But within those first 5-10 years, they should look to explore as much as possible. Look for different roles. Don't just go and ask your manager, can you give me a new role every quarter or something? But even within your new role, be open to new assignments, new markets as much as possible. Get all that complexity covered in the first 5-10 years, and that kind of makes you so ready for the next period of let's say 20, 30, 40 years of your career. That's a mistake that I made. I was too hungry for growing faster and all those things, and my learning trajectory was more around sharpening one skill. Now I feel the pinch, so I would rather give this advice and not have others feel the same.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So we're at the halfway stage now, and we're going to talk about your shiny new object. So can you tell us what that is?
Okay. So my shiny new object, and Tom, it's a very interesting question, one which pressed me to think a little bit deeper. And what I've realized here is a little bit contrary to the idea of a shiny new object. For me, it is about seeing through the glare of the shiny new object. The idea here is to look deeper, always, and to see through the packaging. That's what a good analyst would do. But that's also what, in my opinion, what differentiates an astute marketer from the rest of the pack. By that, but that detail, that deeper analysis is usually not very interesting or sexy. For example, just because every brand is winning on herbals and consumers want herbal products does not mean you should bring a herbal product yourself. Just because vitamins as a category is doing well during COVID in most markets does not mean it will do well for you as well. You need to look beyond the shine of what a herbal is throwing at you, or what this shiny new vitamins category is throwing at you. I have a little bit more detailed example to share, but before that, I'll just want to pause and ask you, right? Does this idea gel well with the topic, and does it make sense here?
It makes sense, and I like its provocative nature, given the name of this show. So please continue.
Cool. So some of the examples I thought of were the nerdy ones and some less nerdy ones. There were none which were not nerdy. So first, let me go with the nerdy one. I'll go back to my earlier example of marketing ROIs. Imagine you are a brand manager, and a finance or a guy like me, analytics guy, comes to you and says that you have a very low ROI on your TV investment, and that needs to be cut down, blah, blah, blah. They even throw in some heavy language and say the results are coming from a machine learning model, or used by many other multinationals for many years. So this can't be wrong. So one of your options, because there is so much shining around it, if I may say so, you could just accept it and just move on, right? This is what the best model says, so just accept it. The other option, but sorry, before I move on, but if you accept this, by the way, this is gonna hit your brand hard, right? Again, I would say you can't grow your brand by investing less in them. The other option then is to look beyond the glare of the machine learning model. I know, you don't need to be a statistician to look beyond that. All you need to ask is some of the very relevant questions, right? Ask that person, does it consider that your brand is a growth stage organic juice brand and not the same as a mature cola brand? Does it consider that your competition is investing heavily on TV? And if you don't respond, there could be long-term implications. So before they suggest that you need to cut down your investments, have they really considered all of these variables, if I may say so? And these are the questions. These are the layers of the onion that you have to peel to get deeper and get the right answer. Else you can just let the brand get hit. Yeah? Any thoughts on this example?
So how how do you know when you're asking enough questions? How do you know when you're looking deep enough and not just taking it at face value? You're an analyst, so it's kind of easier for you because that's your reflex. But some of us might be more creative or enjoy reacting to different trends and shiny new objects, and there can be value in that, obviously. So how does someone who isn't from an analytical background start to behave more like an analyst?
Interesting. I think first thing, if you're very sold to what you're doing, right, you don't have to be analyst. You're already going to be analyzing everything. The second important thing here is, if the solution being proposed is counterintuitive to you, it's not something that you want to do, then you already have the question right there, right? In this particular example, the marketing manager already had this question that, I need to invest more, and you're telling me not to invest more, right? And that's where you would begin, from where this suggestion that you got starts to appear counterintuitive. That's your starting point, right? And when you do that, then you ask them the question around, okay, you're telling me my ROI is low, right? Tell me why. Just start asking these kind of questions around. And anyway, you kind of add a why or a how to anything, it becomes a very interesting question. So start to ask around, why is it that you think my ROI is low? Then they start to show some more detail, right? That is exactly the point. An analyst like me would start showing my marketing manager a little bit more detail. Hey, look, here is the curve. Around, according to this curve, your GRPs are saturating, right? If you put in more GRPs, you don't get enough new reach or something. That's a one level detail which opens up on its own. The marketing manager did not really ask about the curve. The curve was brought up by the analyst himself or herself, just because you asked a question which was counterintuitive to you, right? And so on, it goes on and on as you kind of start to look. And to be fair, it's not as much of a black box as it appears, right? When we are kind of proposing these things to, let's say, our marketing heads and the business heads, we are often going prepared by talking as much as possible in the business language. We're trying to make it clear to them. We're trying to present as many details. So the questions is are there in front. So you don't really have to do too much in a way. You just have to be ready to peel deeper. You can't just be in a hurry. Hey, you know what? I have 10 different things to do. And, okay, top line, it says this and just get it done, right? It's not how it works. Even if you have the smartest person suggesting you something, if it is counterintuitive to you, you must ask.
So, what new forms of data and new types of insight are you excited about?
New forms of data and new forms of insights. Can you elaborate your question a little bit more?
So, talking about marketing as a discipline, obviously, and you're talking about giving brand teams and marketers better insight based on data to really help them understand the why or the how certain things are happening. And in your example, if an ROI on TV isn't working out, you can ask why. Why has this happened? Or, what's the story here as compared to spending more, and so on and so forth. But what you're talking about there are pre-existing measures for the way that you attribute success to different channels and so on. But in a world where something like voice is becoming very prevalent, and voice ads on voice on smart speakers and so on are existing, that is a whole new data set that is becoming available. Or whether it's consumers selling their data back to brands, like obviously the world of data and the analysis of that data is evolving and changing. And I assume as an analyst, you must be exposed to lots of different opportunities to look at new data from new platforms to get new insight. And I'm interested to know what they are.
Great. I think so. Now it's very clear, Tom. I think in terms of these new data, you will probably uh, see that the underlying data that they are kind of representing is roughly very similar. Like, how many people did you reach? Really, what was their reaction to it, and what was their engagement to it? All of these things largely remain the same. But what changes is the platform, and what is the importance of reach or an engagement in each of these platforms. Consider China for an example. The other day I was actually sitting through, I don't manage China as a market, but I was sitting through a learning session where they were talking about the number of platforms there. Really, I think it is so proliferated that every single thing, you must have already heard through various podcasts, that you must have already done, that they can do everything on WeChat, for instance, right? From ordering a coffee to probably buying an insurance, everything can be done. So now this is very different versus what a Southeast Asia market is currently looking at. And these things are coming in bits and pieces, right? And these become the new data sets that I'm talking about here. It's not that we have a completely new data set. We have new ways of finding the same data, new sources of the same data. I'll give you another example, right? We all know, we have retail data partners like Nielsen and Kantar and IQVIA in this market, right? Now people are going beyond. People are trying to uh, challenge these large existing companies and trying to set up their own, AI based systems, if I may call that. They will collect some receipts, run some AI model to kind of read that receipts automatically, bring out a whole lot of data and say, this is what the consumers are purchasing. Sometimes, and in fact, this is more common in the Western markets than in Southeast Asia. You would see things like, if I see a TV ad today, what is the reaction that I have, me as a person, that I have tomorrow? Am I purchasing that product tomorrow or in the next month? So the data sets are not just new; they're more connected. So who is watching, and is that person buying or not? So you get that granularity of data, that larger sources of data. Yeah.
So, following on from that, how do you bridge the gap between some of those digital metrics, or cost per click, click through rate, and so on, that are indicative of what consumers are thinking and feeling, but certainly not completely descriptive of what they're thinking and feeling? How do you think that the industry is going to develop to try and find better ways of capturing what consumers are actually thinking, which aren't focus groups and aren't just tracking things like cost per click and click through rate and view through rate and so on?
True. In fact, that's something that I do as part of my role as well, right? And it's not perfect yet. I think the underlying, so I always keep going back to, what is the underlying similarity in these things? The similarity is that if you are making a spend, you ought to see some sort of a return on that, right? So that is your first step. Whether that's a new digital metric or you're spending on the traditional media or anywhere, you just have to see if your spends are working fine. You're getting that right ROI. Now, let's say you're talking about a digital metrics click-through rate, right? That comes at stage 2. You identify first that digital is not working for you, right? And then you see my click-through rate is very high. It's not that you will be able to get a very new metric as such, but then you will be able to go deeper, right? Are there examples where click-through rates, first you'll ask, really click-through rate is the right metric, or should I look at something else, right? After the consumers click, when they come to my website, how long do they stay? Really, is my page as important, right? So one who is managing the digital side, right? That person would already have that kind of a tree set up in front of them, to say, after click through rate, the next level for me to check is the page, the page in which they're landing, the bounce rates, and so on. And that is another onion, right? You keep peeling that onion deeper and deeper, and you keep finding a place, and you will find a place where the problem is. First, you identify the problem, low ROI. And then when you look at that tree of bounce rate being high or my page not being as good, that is when you try and understand. And then, of course, the traditional metrics would come in later to say, okay, I'll do an FGD to understand why do people think my page is not good. And there are some very high tech methods coming in. People are doing eye tracking and other things, but those are very specific to certain tasks. And to be fair, not all companies are having their own website to be able to design their own approaches, right? There is an e-commerce world, and there is a whole big world where people do not currently have their own e-commerce websites. For GSK, for instance, right? We are not a direct seller. We sell it to other e-commerce websites who sell it for us. For us to be implementing those kind of approaches, like where is their mouse moving? Are they really moving the mouse to the right corner of the screen where we want them to go? And all of those deeper researches happen at the end of the retailers and those who are really running their e-commerce shows. For the rest, it is still important to look at that underlying view and then start from there, in that tree diagram that I just explained. Makes sense?
It does make sense, but crushingly, it's the end of the podcast, and I could talk to you about this stuff all day, but we have to leave it there. Ashish, thank you so much for your time and your stories and your insights. If someone wants to get in touch with you about work or some other thing, how would you like them to do that?
I think LinkedIn would be best. I would suggest that if you're getting in touch, just write a small note as in exactly what is your objective, and I would be very happy to respond.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Hi, just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That'd just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.